Alright, today we're going to take a look at adjusting the fuel screw on your 4-stroke motocross bike. If you have the Keihin FCR carburetor, you likely will have a fuel screw underneath the float area right here. And if you do not have an adjustable one like this that you see, I highly recommend you get one because it makes life so much easier as far as making adjustments that we're about to demonstrate here. Basically, this pilot fuel screw right here is to be adjusted for the lower idle region of your RPMs. If you have trouble cranking your bike, it often means that this fuel screw is adjusted too lean, which means it is tightened too much up in there. And if you have a lot of hesitation issues right off of throttle when you're first starting out, that also possibly means that the adjustment is too lean, which means that that screw is tightened too much. So we're going to do some examples of how the bike sounds differently when the screw is adjusted properly and when it is adjusted too lean. You'll notice some popping sounds coming out of the exhaust when it is too lean. And that can quite often make it difficult to crank a bike like this, or even make it difficult to ride properly. So make sure that your carburetor is cleaned and adjusted properly. Make sure that the jetting is to spec per your service manual. If you haven't inspected the jets recently, you should take a look inside the holes of your jets, because if your bike sits without being ridden for long periods of time, it's quite often that the jets will clog up due to ethanol-based fuels. So make sure you physically inspect the internal parts of your carburetor and your jets, and that will help resolve a lot of basic issues that people have cranking 4-strokes like this. So we're going to fire this bike up and make sure it's warmed up properly. You should always make sure that the bike is completely warmed up before you do any carburetor adjustments. And the easiest way to do that is crank her up, and then you'll feel the radiator right here. If the radiator feels nice and warm, you're probably good for any adjustments, and you'll feel the exhaust coming out of the pipe here. When that's nice and hot, you'll know that it's ready to have adjustments made that will actually be more legit than trying to do adjustments with a cold engine. So we're going to crank this bike up real quick and warm it up, and then we'll continue. Okay, we've got her warmed up now. I happen to have a radiator cap that has a temperature gauge on it, and usually around 150 degrees Fahrenheit is pretty well warmed up. As you can see, that one is right there. And a couple of tricks you can learn for cranking one of these bikes cold. I actually increase the idle just a little bit, which is this knob right here. If you raise your idle just a tad, especially when the motor is cold, they usually crank a little bit easier. And as well, of course, you'll pull your choke out to crank it cold. We don't give it any throttle when we crank it cold. And we don't use the hot start, of course, when we crank it cold. That's typically only used after the motor's been warmed up and you may stall the engine on the track or something like that. But for general purpose, we don't give it any throttle unless the motor is completely warmed up as far as cranking her up. So now we're going to listen to the difference between a lean fuel screw, which will be that little guy right down in there. We're going to make some adjustments to it. Typically only about 2 full turns out is a typical adjustment, but refer to your service manual on that. But around 2 turns out, 2 complete revolutions out from closed is the typical adjustment for that. If you're having to go past 3 turns out, you should probably change out your pilot jet. If you're having to go less than 2 turns out, your pilot jet is probably too small. Another device that I highly recommend is the adjustable leak jet, which is this guy right down here. That's a Boysen adjustable leak jet. Highly recommend it. It just makes things easier when it comes to making fine little tweaks and adjustments. But we're going to listen to the fuel screw adjustments right now. Alright, did you hear how much popping and carrying on, I would call it, coming out of the exhaust was occurring? That means your fuel screw was adjusted too lean. If it is adjusted like that, that will make your bike very difficult to start because it's starving for fuel, basically. This is opposite of what a 2-stroke has as far as an air screw. This is more mediating fuel being pumped into the carburetor. So we would count how many turns. If you can see that right there. This adjustable screw, see it's got numbers on the side so you can keep track of how many turns out you're looking at. Okay, so if it's all the way seated right in there, if you can't turn it any further, and don't over torque it because you'll break something off in there, we need to make sure that this is adjusted out 2 full revolutions. Okay, so there is 1, and then 2 full revolutions. That's typically where these bikes should be set at. So let's listen to it again with the proper setting, and you might have to retweak it just a little bit to make it idle right, but we don't want the idle to be going up and down erratically. That's the secret to making these bikes run a little bit better. right, you see the difference there? As soon as we open the fuel screw up another turn, it was about a full turn, half turn?
Probably full.
Roughly a full turn out, it stopped all that popping that was going on coming out of the exhaust. And if your four-stroke has excessive popping noises coming out of the pipe, that usually means you've got something lean as far as an adjustment in the carburetor. It can be your fuel screw could be lean, your pilot jet could be lean, your main jet could be lean, your needle and your clip position could be lean. You might just have some clogged passages. If your leak jet is clogged, that can cause issues. If any jets are clogged because of the evaporation of the ethanol in your pump gas, that'll also cause jets to clog up and do more than just blow them out with compressed air. You usually have to remove the jets entirely and inspect them all the way through. So clogged jets are no good for four strokes. These are very sensitive bikes that need to have proper jetting to crank and run easily. Otherwise you'll just suffer like a lot of people do. Alright, so we're going to run it one more time and we'll go up and down with the fuel screw adjustment so you can hear the difference once again. Alright, did you notice when it was leaned down too far, the bike was trying to die off, as well as it was trying to stall quite easily, in addition to the excessive popping coming out of the pipe? That's a sign of a lean lower circuit right there on your pilot jet or your fuel screw. So if yours sounds like that, that means you've got some leanness going on inside the lower circuit of your jetting. Alright, so we would have to turn that back out. She turned it in almost 2 full turns, at least 2 full turns, to create that lean sound. Alright, so we'll fire it back up, adjust it back out to where it should be. Now this bike probably will not even crank properly, so I'm going to have to turn that fuel screw back out before we continue this demo. Okay, ideally we want it to sound just like it did there, where it idles high for just a second or so and then it drops back down to your normal idle. That typically means your fuel screw is set properly. If it immediately drops to low idle, you could probably lean that fuel screw just a half a turn or so, because we want it to be right in the middle of being lean and rich. That'll give you the maximum throttle response, easiest cranking. You won't run too hot, because if your bike runs extremely lean, you'll start to get hot. And you'll notice just with our little demonstration here, we are up well over 200 degrees, where we should be around 170 for optimum heat, or optimum operating temperature. And that's another thing, a four-stroke is not meant to sit and idle for long periods of time. They will run warm due to their nature. But a lean carburetor will definitely run hot and that can be another problem if you're experiencing overheating issues. But the main problem that people have is just setting that fuel screw properly. Make sure that you purchase one of those adjustable fuel screws. You can get those anywhere online. And if you really want to go for it, get the adjustable leak jet, which is that guy right there on the left. The Boysen Quick Shot 3. Very handy, so that you can make all these adjustments without breaking open the carburetor and wasting a lot of time. So there we go, adjusting your fuel screw. This happens to be a 2004 Yamaha YZ250F that I've completely been through and refurbished, and it's a beauty. Check out our links at the bottom of the video. We've got more helpful videos that'll assist you in adjusting carburetors and doing basic maintenance on dirt bikes.